Hey guys, it's Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing my most disappointing reads of 2023. 2023 was kind of a difficult year because I really didn't like very much that I read. Unfortunately, I kind of had a hard time finding my top favorites. Usually I have about 15 and I only had 8 solid ones, and then I wanted to get to at least 10, so I added a couple more that were maybe on the edge. So you'll see that probably later this week, but for now I have some disappointing reads, and even the disappointing reads, I only have 5, so it wasn't a year full of things I really didn't like or was upset by. It was just not very memorable things. Even if I did really like it in the moment, I was like, oh, and then I just forgot about them. There was just not very many that I was super passionate and excited about. Most of my reading this year was pretty mediocre, so I don't have a lot of disappointing books, but I also don't have a lot of favorites, unfortunately. So these books are the ones that I read either all the way through. There's one that I read most of the way through, so I still wanted to count it on here, that I just ended up being disappointed by. I was hoping that I would really love them, and they just didn't quite work for me for whatever reason. Most of them I didn't necessarily give a really poor rating, it was just more middle of the road, but they were all kind of sad for me. So let's start with The Mysteries of Udolpho by Anne Radcliffe. I read this for Feb Regency, and unfortunately, I enjoyed myself. This was one where there was a lot that I enjoyed, but it was just too long. It was just way too long, and I really didn't like the romance in it at all. I felt kind of uncomfortable with it, if I remember correctly. I honestly don't remember a ton about it, but I do remember that the romance, I was like, this is so, he was kind of leaning on the abusive side a little bit, and manipulative side and controlling side. That was the biggest annoyance with it, was very possessive and not understanding of her, and I just did not like that. And then yeah, it was just long. By the end I was like, okay, let's move on. Even though it was really interesting stuff, it just kept going and going and going. And so I think if it was a little shorter, I probably would have liked it more, even with the romance aspect that I didn't really love. But by the end, I was just like, okay, I'm over this. I'm not interested anymore. I'm not invested, and that's the way it is. So that was a little bit of a letdown, but we got through it and it's fine. Next, I have Lady Anna by Anthony Trollope. This one I gave a 2.5 stars. This was one that I've kept it because I'm hoping in the future I'll be able to reread it and maybe like it at least a little bit more. I don't think I would ever love this book, but I think maybe going into it knowing a little bit more about what to expect might help my experience. Maybe not, I don't know. There was just a lot more legal stuff in this book. This book follows a young woman it's a Victorian novel, whose mother is going to court because it's in question as to whether Anna is legitimate and therefore will inherit her father's stuff, or if she's not legitimate and doesn't have a claim on that stuff. And because of this, there's also a big question about who she's going to marry, because she loves this poor boy that she spent a lot of time with in her life, who's a tailor's son, but she may be upper class, may be a lady, and so she wouldn't be able to marry him. And so that sounds so interesting, right, and dramatic, but most of the story was really just focused on the court case itself, and I just got really bored with that and was not interested in that. I was much more interested in the characters and their dynamics. I also really didn't love the way the romance went, unfortunately. I don't like how Lady Anna as a character was treated within the confines of the romance itself. I felt like she didn't have a lot of autonomy, and when she did, it was just to be a devoted girl, and I don't know. There was some aspects to her character that were good. It's not like she was completely flat or anything. In fact, that's one of my favorite things about Anthony Trollope, is he creates very complex characters. Nobody is 100% the bad guy. Nobody is 100% the good guy. Everybody has their flaws. Everybody has their good qualities as well. And that really comes out in here. But the way the romance went, I just felt like it fell flat, where it could have had a lot more depth to it and to the experience and to the characters. It just it tried to, it hinted at some depth and then pulled back from it, and I was kind of disappointed by that. And then yeah, all the legal stuff, but overall it was not the worst book ever or anything like that, but it was disappointing and kind of boring at points for me. But I do love Trollope, so that his quality of writing and character building definitely helped it, but it wasn't my favorite of his by a long shot. Next we have My Darling Girl by Jennifer McMahon, which I listened to the audiobook for, and this was one that I honestly didn't necessarily expect to love, but I did hope I would at least least enjoy myself, and by the end I just didn't. I just didn't really like the portrayal of motherhood it gave, especially because it was said it was dedicated at the beginning to mothers who just find it all too much sometimes. And so I was hoping it would get some like good, interesting, in-depth messaging, but it ended up just being a horror that was just creepy, and the motherhood discussion in it actually like made me uncomfortable. I was like, I don't know how I feel about this kind of weird like abuse and like not really connection. Like, I had hoped for a little bit more depth of a relationship between mothers and daughters in this book because of the dedication, and it just didn't. Like, it was just kind of uncomfortable by the end. And you know, if you like horror, maybe it would be your thing, but I'm not a horror person. I also expected it to be more of a thriller than a horror, and so that also took me off guard. And it also played with mental health in a way that I didn't really love either. So anyway, it was just not that great. I was hoping I would have a good time with it, and I just didn't. Next, we have The Invisible Hour by Alice Hoffman. This one probably is the one I'm most upset by, because the first half of this book I freaking loved. It was so good. I loved the writing style. I loved the experience of hearing the story of this mother and daughter and their experiences in this cult and all of that jazz, and I really, really loved the first half. I was just enjoying myself so much. I love Alice Hoffman's writing style, and this was just so great. And then the second half happened, and it actually made me uncomfortable. This one is kind of an homage to The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne, and the second half we actually have Nathaniel Hawthorne get involved in the story. There's a magical realism element, which I've decided, I think, reading this and Practical Magic by Alice Hoffman, I don't actually really like the magical realism that much. Maybe I need to read other authors with it because I haven't really read that much. But in this case, I just didn't really like it. Practical Magic I liked a lot more, and so there were like aspects to the magical realism that I didn't love, but on the whole, I definitely really liked that and will reread it in the future and stuff. But The Invisible Hour, I honestly probably loved the first half more than I loved Practical Magic, but then the second half came with the magical realism element, and it just made me uncomfortable because she has this like sexual relationship come about with Nathaniel Hawthorne, and to me, I'm like, it's just creepy to like have this author write about this character who's obsessed with Nathaniel Hawthorne in a way that makes it feel like the author herself really loves Nathaniel Hawthorne, and then have that character have a sexual relationship with this real historical figure who had his own family and his own experiences, and like force this other relationship on him. Like, it just felt uncomfortable to me. I was like, this is a real person that you're just like making a sexualized character in your story. And I know like he was more than that. It wasn't like that's all he was there for or anything, but it just made me uncomfortable. I had wanted so much to enjoy it after that first half. I was like, this is gonna be a new favorite, like of all time, not even just of the year. I'm loving it. And then the second half happened and I'm so disappointed. So this was definitely, of this list, if I had ranked it, this would be number one for sure. And the final book I have for my most disappointing reads of 2023, I have Prize Women by Carolyn Lee. I did not finish this one. I stopped about 100 pages before the end. This story follows a really interesting event in history, in Canadian history, where there was a man who died who in his will said that the bulk of his money, the remainder after a few other things that he put in there, would go to the woman who in the 10 years after his death bore the most children. And so there's a lot of discussion about motherhood and having children in this particular time period and context, and it's interesting, but I hated the main characters. We follow two women specifically who know each other and become friends, and also are both working with this will, not on purpose. They kind of just end up in a position where they could end up having the most children, either one of them. But one of the main characters I felt like was so selfish and self-centered all the time. There was a point where at the very beginning of the book she's very depressed, trigger warnings for contemplating suicide in this story, and then she's able to move forward and that's great. But then when her her husband starts suffering from depression heavily and is struggling to do anything and has a different reaction to depression, but is still feeling those same emotions. She like looks down on him and treats him as like, oh my gosh, you're being ridiculous, you're so lazy or whatever, which is not true. Like, we've seen the rest of the book that he's a lot of things and he's definitely a flawed person, but lazy is not one of those things. He's clearly like severely depressed, and she's just like not sensitive to that at all. In fact, she even says he disgusts her, and I was like, okay, that was pretty much when I decided to set this down, because I was like, I'm sorry, your husband is experiencing a similar mental health crisis to what you experienced earlier, and you're going to act like that with him? Like, I just, yeah, was not, I mean, I can understand her frustration, but like, she has absolutely no sympathy for him, and this is very much a woman good, men bad kind of a book, and then like the one or two good men end up like leaving or dying or whatever, and it's just upsetting. I really didn't like that. And then the other main female character I actually did like a lot, but then suddenly she started having moments where I was like, oh my gosh, like her relationship with her second husband in this book, I'm not gonna give any details about anything around that situation, but her second husband in this book, she like is grateful to him, but like, I don't know, it's one of those books where it's exploring this idea of like being grateful to someone and really caring about another person in a way where they mean a lot to you, but like I can't romantically love them. And I'm like, that just shows so little about human nature. I'm like, if you're living with someone and you're really affectionate towards them and care about them genuinely, and you're genuinely grateful and love being around them, you're going to like have romantic feelings for them most of the time. I guess there also is an exploration of homosexuality in this book, so it's hard to tell if maybe she is just homosexual. That's probably what it's getting at now that I'm saying it out loud. But I guess in my head I was thinking of her as being bisexual just because of her relationship with her first husband, at least to start with. But I guess, you know, it fluctuates throughout life, so potentially it could have just been like she's not into men anymore, which is fine. But I don't know, I felt like her second husband was a great person and he just kind of gets tossed aside, and so that experience was happening at the same time as the other main character was mistreating her husband, and I just was like, I can't do this. I want a story where we see strong independent women who are also dealing with strong independent men who like all have their own issues and they're all working together to figure it out. It's not us versus them all the time, and especially with historical fiction nowadays that tends to be a theme, and I felt like in this it just wasn't being handled in a way that I liked. In fact, it was irritating me, so I stopped reading it. I was like, you know what, I'm not a fan, and I haven't really thought about it since, so there's that. And that is it. Those are my 5 most disappointing reads of 2023. Let me know down below if you've read any of these, your thoughts on them. Did you like them? Did you feel disappointed by them like I did? What were some of the books you were disappointed with in 2023? I would love to know. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.